I'm going to show you guys today how I made this beautiful Lamborghini steering wheel. It took me a couple of hours. It really wasn't that hard to make, including the texturing process. So I'm going to compress all that into like 10-15 minutes, however long this video is going to be. You can see the whole modeling, texturing, rendering process. You're going to see how I did everything. It's going to be a little bit of a hard surface. It's going to be a little bit of organic modeling. It's going to be a little bit of texturing, even a little bit of texture painting. So stay tuned. We're going to have everything in this video. All right. By the way, guys, if you want to support the channel, you can download this model for just $1. The link is in the description, so go check that out. Let's get right into the video. All right. So first of all, of course, as always, we're going to need a reference image. Okay, so just add a reference image. Go to add from the Shift A menu, find image, add a reference image, and that way when you add an image, it's just added as like a plane. And we're gonna push it into the background. And I just got this picture of some Lamborghini steering wheel on Google. Right, you can just download any picture, place it in the Blender. And usually when I place it in the background, I like to add some transparency. Right, just it makes it a little bit easier to work with. Right, it's a little bit, it improves the visibility of the whole workspace just a little bit better. Right. Then once we do that, we're going to use a circle and we're going to just shape out the rough outline of the shape of the steering wheel, right? You can see we kind of just scaled up the circle to match the size of the steering wheel. We extruded it inwards a little bit, and then we're deleting one half, and we're going to use a mirror modifier with that so that anything we do on one side is going to be copied onto the other side as well, right? So we don't have to do everything twice. And then we can just kind of adjust some of the vertices on the inside of the steering wheel in the inner circle just to get the right shape. Now this is before any subdivision, so we just need a very rough shape. We just need to get the main bumps, right? We need this kind of indent in the handle because the part in the middle has to be a little bit more narrow. But other than that, just kind of adjust the vertices here. And we can start extruding some extra faces over here on the side where we have this kind of little part that connects towards the middle of the steering wheel. That's going to have to be a little bit of a different structure, right? And once we have everything done there, we're going to add some thickness to this object. We're going to extrude it so it's three-dimensional, not just a flat plane. And we're going to scale this part in the middle a little bit, make it a little bit thinner, just so that's the part that connects the handles to the rest of the steering wheel, right? And by this point, we added a subdivision surface modifier as well, so everything is a little bit smoother, everything's a little bit more organic, so we can see a little bit more what the final result is going to look like, right? So we're just playing around with some of these faces a little bit more to get the right shape. We're going to delete some faces in the middle. We're going to add some loop cuts, slide some vertices and stuff like that just to make sure we have the right shape. And now we're going to delete some of the faces and the edge loops at the bottom of the steering wheel. That way we're going to have this cut so we can have the clear separation between the handles on the side and this little carbon fiber or plastic shape down in the middle, right? We're going to have to separate the two materials. We're going to have to separate the two objects. So we're deleting that part. We're going to create that separately later. Now this part over here at the bottom of the leather handle, we have no face here at the moment, but we're going to fill that, and then we're going to inset a face, so we have a nice little edge there. And we're going to delete the face in the middle, and then we're going to use a loop cut there just to tighten that edge a little bit better, right? And we're going to do something similar at the top here, because again, we have to have a separation, but it's still the same material. So we already have a loop cut where this kind of cut is supposed to be, but we're just going to add a loop cut coming towards that from the top and also from the bottom. And that way we can take the middle loop cut, we can scale that down, and we have this nice little edge, this nice little crevice between, where the separation is supposed to be. And we can also just make a few more loop cuts just to tighten that shape a little bit better, right? You can see that looks pretty good. Now we're going to scale down some of these faces, make them a little bit thinner just to get the right shape here. All right, we're going to add some more loop cuts. We're going to do the same thing over here at the bottom, right? That pretty much finalizes our steering wheel handle shape. And we're going to use a loop cut, or we're going to use an edge loop from the bottom of the steering wheel. We have this cut off. We're going to duplicate that. We're going to use that to extrude the second shape that we were talking about in the middle at the bottom of the steering wheel, right? You can see we can just duplicate that, separate it to new object. Obviously, it's going to be easier that way. And we're just going to extrude that inwards a little bit, scale it, play around with some of the vertices, and just get the right shape for this kind of middle part, right? We're going to connect those. We're going to extrude some more stuff, get this other little shape on top, which is holding some buttons, right? And once we get the right shape, we can just extrude this thing inwards a little bit. We can make a little hole at the surface, so we can start making some buttons there, right? As you can see, we can just duplicate some of the faces at the bottom, extrude them. We don't have any subdivision surface on this yet. We can just use some of these faces from the bottom here to shape out some of the buttons, right? As you can see, just some more loop cuts, just get the right shape for this, make it a little hexagon. We're going to inset some faces at the bottom with eye. We're going to inset those so we can extrude them inwards and make a little hole. There's a little hole in this button. Then we can add a subdivision surface modifier, and once we do that, obviously we're going to need some loop cuts to tighten the edges a little bit to make it look a little bit sharper and pointier, right? And that looks pretty good now, right? We're going to do something very similar with the button on top. We're just going to duplicate some faces, extrude them out. This is also, again, a separate object. And we're going to inset some faces at the top here. We're going to delete the faces in the back. And again, we're just going to use some loop cuts to tighten these edges. Everything looks smoother with the subdivision surface. The edges look a lot more realistic and they look a lot nicer. And then we're just going to take one of the face loops that goes around the button, and then we're going to extrude that backwards and that way we have a clear separation between the button and the base of the button, right? So now that our button is ready, we can go ahead and move on to the center pad of the steering wheel, okay? So for that, we're going to use a circle with 6 vertices, all right? So a hexagon, and we're going to scale that, rotate it, put it into place. We're going to subdivide it a couple times, and already we're going to put a subdivision surface modifier, but aside from that, we're going to subdivide it so we have some more vertices that we can work with, right? And once we subdivide it, we can just use some proportional editing to just get the right shape. It's not a perfect hexagon, it's kind of rounded and smooth, so we're going to shape that correctly with the subdivision surface or with the proportional editing tool, right? And once we have the right circle, we can just extrude the rest of the shape just out of that little circle, okay? We're going to extrude everything, push it forwards, add some thickness, and then we're going to extrude it backwards as well. Just turn this into a 3D shape, turn this into a solid object, right? And again, a couple of loop cuts just to tighten the edges a little bit better. Now down here in the middle, we're going to use the geometry that we already have, or the topology that we already have from the rest of the center pad. We're going to extrude that, scale it inwards, and we have this little pad in the middle which holds the logo, right? So once we extrude this towards the middle, we have this nice circle. Well, it's not even a circle, it's a very messy hexagon, let's say, with a lot of extra vertices. We're going to use those extra vertices to shape out one half of this logo, right? We still have a mirror modifier, or I think maybe I didn't have it on this one. Yeah, I just deleted one half at this point, and then I added another mirror modifier to this, right? Because initially we didn't have one. But anyway, we're going to use these vertices that we have to shape out the shape of the logo, this little Lamborghini shield, right? And once we have the shield shaped out, we need to fill this in, and we don't want to have an end gone, so we're just going to select this entire edge loop and go over to face and grid fill, right? That gives us a nice filling for this shape with perfectly good topology, right? We're going to finish it off with a few more edge loops, and as you can see, that looks pretty good for the center pad. The model is more or less done here. Now over here, we're going to move to the buttons on the side for the windshield wipers, and I don't know what else this stuff is for. If somebody knows, tell me. If anybody owns Lamborghini, let me know, but then you're probably not watching my videos. Anyway, we're going to use one vertex to shape out the little frame for these buttons, okay? We're just using one vertex, and we got that by just taking a plane, pressing X, and collapsing all the faces and edges into one vertex, so it just turns any mesh into just a single vertex. It makes it pretty convenient. So you can just have one vertex and shape out this little frame here, okay? We're going to shape that out just very briefly, very roughly. And once we shape that out, we're going to extrude that frame outwards, and we're going to use that to shape the rest of this kind of plastic piece that connects the handlebar with the center pad of the steering wheel, okay? So we're going to create everything out of that one frame that we made, because it's most important that we have that hole, and the rest of the topology is going to be dependent on that hole, on that kind of frame for the buttons, right? So we're going to extrude everything outwards and move it left and right just to get the right shape, just basic modeling stuff. We're going to add a couple of loop cuts so we can make a little bridge across this frame, okay? The bridge that separates the two buttons. And then, of course, once we add a subdivision surface to this, it gets very round. So we're going to make everything a little bit sharper again with just a couple of loop cuts. One loop cut on every side of each corner will do the job here, right? Now, once we do that, we want to make the actual buttons, right? So since we have the frame, the inner part of the frame, the hole in the frame, has the same shape as the button is supposed to have, okay? So we can just take an edge loop out of the frame. We can duplicate that, separate it to new object if you want to, and we can just use that to shape one of the buttons, right? So you take that, extrude it inwards or scale it down, right? Or you can also maybe inset it, but it's probably going to be some intersection there. But we extrude that outwards, and when we scale it down, and then you can see we have this nice shape, which is just like the button, right? And we're going to do the same thing with the other button over here. This one's going to be a little bit different because we have to move around some of the edges or the corners here manually just to get the right shape, because we're basically turning a pentagon into a quad, into a square, you know? So we have to move these to make it a more square kind of shape so it fits this little hole in the middle here. And once we do that, we more or less have the button ready, right? Alright, now we're going to go over to the side, and we're going to start making some of the stitches on the inner part of the steering wheel, right? We need to have some stitches, some sewing or some stuff like that, right? So we're going to add a pentagon just so we can use it as a reference, because all the stitches are in a pentagon kind of shape, right? We're going to add a pentagon, and then we're going to use that pentagon as a reference so we can shape out our stitches and place them in a perfect pentagon, right? So we're just going to use a plane to shape out one of the stitches, some loop cuts, some bevels and stuff like that. We're going to extrude it, add some thickness to it, make it look nice and round and smooth. But this is going to be a very, very tiny detail, so it doesn't really matter if it's very low in poly, okay? As you can see, this is going to be good enough. Smooth shading is good enough, okay? So once we have one of these, we can just rotate it around the center by 72 degrees at a time, okay? We're going to rotate the whole thing by 18 degrees because that's going to make it a little bit easier to tile it, right? We're going to delete this one from the side here, and we're going to copy everything to the other side of one of these edges, and now it's perfectly tileable. So if we add an array modifier, and we set the Y factor to whatever, right, we can just increase the number of the array modifier, and it gives us like a perfect row of stitches, which are all in little pentagons, right? It's pretty crazy. It was pretty tough to make this, but anyway, it looks pretty good in the end. We're going to scale this down. Okay, now our stitches are more or less done. I'm just going to delete everything because I only need them to be 2D for now. I don't know why I made it 3D. I need them to be 2D for now because I want to use a shrink wrap later and then extrude them once they're in place. Okay, I'm going to correct all the normals here. And now once we're done, we have to find a way to place them on the inside of the steering wheel. Okay, so the best way to do that is, you can see over here, we're taking an edge from the middle of the inner part of the steering wheel. We're separating that to a new object. Okay, once we have those edges as a separate object, we can just apply the subdivision surface modifier, so we have the topology complete, right? And we're also going to try to separate some of those curves, right? So we have one curve for the middle part of the handles, one curve for the top part, and one curve for the lower part of the handles, right? We're going to have to separate those curves into separate objects, right? And we're going to bring our little pattern that we made over here to this curve, okay? And now we have to rename this to a curve. We're going to convert that into a curve. We're going to place the origin and everything, and now with just the help of a curve modifier, we're going to be able to place this and perfectly make it perfectly follow the inner part of the steering wheel, or the handle of the steering wheel, right? We can just rotate it a little bit. It's a bit of a pain in the ass sometimes to deal with the curve modifier. Sometimes it just doesn't want to do what you want it to do. I don't know why. But once we have it roughly in place here, we're going to add a couple more edges here. We're going to just fill in some of the shapes here. We're going to add some extra topology because that's going to make it a lot easier for this to stick with a shrink wrap modifier, all right? And now you can see that now it's along the surface perfectly, and now that it's along the surface, we can just extrude everything, and with Alt-S just add some extra thickness to these shapes, right? So we can make them actual 3D shapes instead of just 2D surfaces, right? And of course, once this is done, we're just going to duplicate this to the other side because we need to have this all over the steering wheel. We can just parent that. And our model should be pretty much good to go now. I'm going to show you a little wireframe preview with a matte cap over here. The model is done. The model is good to go. Now, next thing, we're going to start making some of the materials. Alright, so first of all, we're going to make a nice leather material for these handlebars around the steering wheel, okay? Or the handles, I don't know if you can call them bars, whatever. Anyway, we're going to add a new material to those, okay? We're going to name that leather, and we're going to make our own procedural leather just using a couple of nodes. It's very simple, so pay attention to it. You're going to probably need this a lot in the future. You don't need to import any textures for this, okay? So the first thing is we need to add a noise texture node, alright? Then we're going to add a color ramp node. We're going to plug the noise texture into the color ramp node, and then we're going to add a bump node. Okay, so we turn all this into a bump map. Then we plug the color ramp into the bump node into the principal node, and you can see already we see this very nasty looking kind of surface appear on our handlebars, right? It looks like it's all molten or something. We're getting somewhere. So now I'm setting the color to black so I have a better preview there. Now the mapping is totally off because there's a lot of stretching, so I'm just going to use a node wrangler. Okay, you can enable that add-on in your add-ons, node wrangler, and just press Ctrl-T on the noise texture node, and then you can map that according to the object, so we don't have to UV unwrap it or anything like that. You can see the mapping is already better. Now we just have to increase the size in the noise texture node, or the scale, to like 170 or something, 200, whatever. We're going to increase the roughness and the detail a little bit. And we're also going to pull the white marker in the color ramp a little bit closer, because that way the transition between the colors is going to be different, which is going to give us a different surface, a different bump map, right? You can see it kind of flattens out. It's kind of like as if you sanded the surface or something. And also finally, we have to decrease the strength in the bump node, all right? And it's going to give us a pretty nice looking leather texture, right? We're pretty much good to go. That's all you need. And we're going to apply the same material to the top of the steering wheel and also to the center pad of the steering wheel, right? Because that's the other places where we have leather. Now the leather's pretty much done. We're going to add some carbon fiber to the bottom part of the steering wheel, the bottom part of the handle, right? So we're going to add a new material to that. We're going to name that carbon fiber. Now for this, you're going to have to download something. You're going to have to download a normal map for a carbon fiber texture. I did this one from textures.com. You can just go there. I'll put a link in the description or something where I downloaded this. You just need a normal map. You don't even need a color map for this. It's pretty straightforward. I'm going to add an image texture node where I'm going to load that normal map. Okay, you have to make sure to set the color space on this image texture node to non-color. Alright, so now we loaded this texture here, and we're going to run that through a normal map node before we plug it into the principal node, okay? And that's going to appear on the surface now. We're also going to use a node wrangler to map everything correctly, because I don't want to use any UV unwrapping here. It's unnecessary. We're just going to map everything according to the object. We're going to set the mapping to box here, or the projection to box. And now if we set the color to black, you're going to see we have a pretty nice looking carbon fiber texture already. But we're still going to mess with a few more things, alright? So first of all, we have to increase the scale a little bit just to make it a little bit finer. It has to be a smaller texture, right? Something like 2 worked here for me. Then you can increase the metallic value. You can reduce the roughness, make it a little bit shinier, adjust the color a little bit. And most importantly, you have to add a clear coat to this texture, okay? Carbon fiber always has a clear coat. It looks a lot better if you had a clear coat with 0 roughness. And now we're going to apply the same carbon fiber texture over here to the other part, to the middle part of the steering wheel behind the buttons, or any other place where you want to put carbon fiber, you can just put it there now, because the texture is pretty much automatically going to map to any object that you assign the material to, because we're using a node wrangler, right? So that's good to go. We're also going to apply our leather to our stitches here, okay? And now we're going to create a new plastic kind of material for this little gap between in the center console between the logo and the other part. All right, we're going to make that over there. And now we're going to make our own custom normal map. Okay, so as you can see over here, I'm using a plane to shape out a kind of hexagon little shape, because in a moment here I'm going to use this hexagon and I'm going to tile it with some ray modifiers so I can make a big surface with a certain pattern, right? And then I can bake that as a normal map onto a plane, and then I can apply that normal map to any other material or any other object that I want to, right? So you can see I have this little hexagon here. I adjusted the settings. You can make it as detailed as you like, because this is going to turn into a normal map anyway. Okay, I'm adding some auto smooth here just to get the right edge shading. And now we're going to go ahead and add an array modifier to this. So the first array modifier, we're going to tile it vertically, if you will, right? We're going to add a bunch of copies of this vertically. Okay, I'm also going to make it a bit more shallow. And once we have our first array modifier, okay, we can just minimize this one. We can add another array modifier. And if we use a constant offset, we can very easily adjust it so we can have a horizontal dimension to the pattern as well, right? So now we can see we have a large surface full of these little hexagons. So now we're just going to add a plane, and we have to make sure that this plane is the right size so that if we place it somewhere, the texture is going to be perfectly seamless, right? So we can place it over here with a scale of about 5, worked from me or something like that, right? And now we can select this plane, and we're going to use this so we can bake a normal map onto it, all right? We're going to add a new material to this plane with an image texture node. In that image texture node, we have to generate a new image, which we're going to name like normal map or something. It's very important that the generated type is a blank, and we're also going to check 32-bit float, all right? Now we're going to set this image texture node. Just remember, you have to make sure to set the color space to non-color on this image texture node before baking. Now we have to switch to the cycles render engine, and down here in the render properties, you're going to find a little bake menu, okay? In the bake menu, set the bake type to normal, select it to active. We have to check that, okay? And once we have that selected, we have to select the surface first, or the pattern first, and then we select the plane, so they're both selected, and then we click on bake. So the pattern is going to be baked onto the plane now. And you can see that in your image editor over here, okay? We get this nice perfect normal map, which is seamless, and we can use it on anything now, okay? You have to make sure also to save this on your computer, because very easily, randomly, for no reason, this texture might just disappear on you at some point, so you want to make sure to save that one. Now over here, I forgot to bake it a non-color color space, so I'm just going to do it again one more time. Okay, I'm going to switch to non-color, and I'm going to bake it one more time real quick. And now that we have this image baked here, we can just load that into new material, which we're going to assign to this middle surface over here around the logo. Okay, just add an image texture node, load that normal map that we just baked, and we can plug that into the principal node with, of course, we're going to need a normal map node between that as well, so the Blender can read it as a normal map. And then we can just use a node wrangler to map this correctly according to the object. Increase the scale a little bit. All right, we have to set the projection to box as well. And if we just increase the scale now, we can see this pattern is perfectly projected on the surface, right? It looks absolutely beautiful. We just have to increase the scale. Maybe we're going to want to invert the normal map or something like that. But you can see it looks pretty nice, right? You can make almost any kind of pattern that you want using this technique. You just have to 3D model it, bake it as a normal map, and just apply it to material. That's it. Look at that. Now, next thing, we have to add the logo. This is the fun part. So for the logo, we're going to add a new material once again. We're going to load an image texture node one more time. We're going to plug that into base color. And now I got this Lamborghini logo by just Googling Lamborghini logo images, downloading the first one of the PNG background. That's it. All right. So you should be able to do that very easily. Now, in this case, it's very important that we map this correctly, okay? Because we have to make sure that our shape is exactly the same shape as the logo of the Lamborghini. I got mine approximately right because I had a reference, but I'm going to have to map it correctly. So in the UV editor, I'm just going to turn this unwrapped surface. I'm just going to make sure that I'm going to modify some of the vertices here to make sure that it fits the shape of the logo perfectly, okay? Now, we also need a normal map for this logo image, okay? The way that you can do that, for example, you can download GIMP, which is a free program for image editing. You can open the image in GIMP, all right? Open up the logo. Now, first of all, we want to make the whole image black and white. So in colors, we're just going to find hue saturation. We're going to reduce the saturation all the way down. Then we're going to add a blur filter. We're just going to add a little bit of blur there, just a couple of points. And finally, we can go to filters. We can go to the generic section, And in the generic section, we can just convert it into a normal map, just because we convert it from a bump map because it's black and white. It turns into a normal map, and it's pretty much good to go. You might want to flip some of the axes like I did here because it's going to make it a little bit better. But we have a normal map. It's ready to go. Perfect. Now we can load that one more time as a separate image and an image texture node, and we'll just plug that into the principal node using a normal map node again. And as you can see, this will create a normal map. It will create a slight bumpy surface here. Now, we're going to make this look a lot nicer by adding some metallic value and also reducing the brightness. And now we can see the bumps a little bit better, and it also looks absolutely gorgeous, right? So the logo is pretty much ready to go. Now, a couple more materials, just the red material for the button over here with a metallic value of 1. And we're now finally going to get to the buttons, which is the fun part. Now, I made a separate tutorial for how to do this in a little bit more detail, so you can check that out. But basically, we're adding a new material. Okay, we're naming that buttons. Then in that new material, we're going to have to create a new image using an image texture node. The image is going to be black. It has to be completely blank, right? 2048 by 2048. And if we plug that into the base color, by default is black. But once we unwrap these buttons, we can texture paint on top of them, right? So over here, I prepared this stencil, which again, you can check out my other video. I talked about this a little bit more. I'll also provide you with the stencil. But if we just texture paint over this as a stencil, right? We use this image as a stencil. We can just texture paint all the individual little icons onto the steering wheel, onto every button that we want. Just like that, no problem. We can make any button that we want, any icon that we want. You can download it, you can make it yourself. And we'll just paint this all over the place. We have the arrows for the left and right turning signal. We have this little headlight icon over here. We're going to place it on top there. And we can just basically go around the entire steering wheel and place all the buttons in place. I have a reference image that tells me exactly where I have to put each of the icons. But I just continue painting these, and that's pretty much the last little texture painting, the last little texturing detail that I need to put on my steering wheel here. Okay, we have this little windshield wipers, stuff like that. We have the race mode, street mode, track mode, and whatever over here on this bottom button. And that's pretty much finished, right? So our steering wheel is pretty much completely textured now. Now, the next thing that we have to do is we have to render it, okay? Now, this is going to be pretty simple, so we don't have to do too much here, but I am going to load an HDRI. So in the shading editor, I'm going to switch to the world mode, okay? I'm going to just load some HDRI that I downloaded. You can go to hdrihaven.com or something. I have this one that I like to use, and I plug that using an environment image node, okay? So now that's already projecting some light onto our steering wheel from the environment. I also set the film background, so I have a transparent background in cycles. But now I can just load a couple of area lights, put one on this side. This one's going to have a very light, warm color, like a light orange color. I'm going to copy that one a couple of times, and I'm going to bring another light to the other side, which is going to be a very light blue color, like a soft blue color. This tends to make a very nice lighting environment if you have warm on one side and cold on the other side, okay? We're going to copy those lights a couple of times, put them all over the place. And as you can see, the more lights, the better. Now we just have to adjust our camera angle a little bit, and once we hit render, we're pretty much good to go. We get a beautiful result, guys. By the way, guys, if you want to support the channel, you can download this model for just $1. The link is in the description, so go check that out. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.